Greg Bakun here. Let's go on a paranormal investigation together. There is no better place to do that than a one-of-a-kind event we're holding at the haunted 300 Clifton Mansion in downtown Minneapolis, Monday, September 30th. This unique event starts with a quick 101 on how to use the equipment. Then we take a very special trolley tour, and unlike normal candlelight ghost tours, we stop at one of the locations on the tour and do a paranormal investigation right there. We return to the 300 Clifton Mansion and embark on a paranormal investigation throughout the beautiful 20,000 square foot home, exploring the large formal living rooms, secret passageways, and basements deep below, including areas not normally accessible to the public. The 101 and investigations are led by Char Savoy and myself. Tickets are limited. This event starts at 6:30 p.m. Monday, September 30th, with a couple of pricing options available, and tickets are available at 300clifton.com. Look for GhostBox Radio Candlelight Ghost Trolley Tours on the main page.
The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host, guest, random reptoid, or chupacabra may not necessarily reflect those of AM 950 Radio, its affiliates, or its sponsors. Now, it's time to step into the unknown. There are things people experience but never talk about. A shadow moving in the corner, flickering of the lights, a disembodied voice. We invite you to talk with us. Share your story, share your experience, because this isn't just your story, this is our story. This is GhostBox Radio with Greg Bakun.
And this is GhostBox Radio on AM 950, where every night we talk about the paranormal, ufology, Bigfoot, and so much more. My name is Greg Bakun. Thank you for joining me on this fantastic Tuesday. It's still very hot out, though, isn't it? And it was even when I got home. I was at the station today. Even by the time I got home, which was around 6:30 or so, it was still like 87 degrees out, at least in my area. So it's what a September, huh? So got a lot to get through today, and I want to get going right away. I'm very, very happy tonight because the last time I had on Lyle, it was kind of, we had some technical difficulty with the audio and stuff. I think it was from the station end. So, I'm just so happy that well, first of all, I'm happy that Lyle has written a new book that's just come out, which is always a great reason to bring someone back on. And I'm glad that he took time out of his very busy schedule to come join me tonight. Those who don't know, Lyle Blackburn is a native Texan known for his work in writing, music, and film. He is the author of several acclaimed books, including The Beast of Boggy Creek and Sinister Swamps, whose subject matter reflects his lifelong fascination with legendary creatures and strange phenomenon. Lyle is also the founder of the rock band Ghoul Town and narrator-producer of documentary films such as The Mothman of Point Pleasant and Boggy Creek Monster. Lyle is a frequent guest on radio programs such as Coast to Coast AM and has been featured on various television shows airing on Animal Planet, Destination America, Travel, Discovery, Science, and Shudder. When Lyle isn't writing books, hunting monsters, or performing with his band, he could be found speaking at various cryptozoology conferences and horror conventions around the United States. Just look for his trademark black cowboy hat, and also make sure you check out his website, lyleblackburn.com. Lyle, welcome to GhostBox Radio.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you very much. As it said in the bio here, that you go around the country doing different conventions and stuff, and as a coincidence, you are going to be out in Minnesota. What is it, October 5th or so, for the Minnesota Bigfoot Conference, if I'm not mistaken. Oh, it's Friday and Saturday, I see.
Right, yeah, that weekend, October 5th, 6th, whatever that weekend is. So I've been a lot of places this year, so I might as well cap it off, start October off with Minnesota.
Well, and so I'm over at the site right now on Facebook talking about it, the Minnesota Bigfoot Conference. I'm looking at this on Facebook, so you just want to type in Minnesota Bigfoot Conference. You also want to go, if you're checking out the website, mnbrt.com. It's a 3-day VIP. There's still spots available. VIP speaker dinner location. That's going to be Friday, At an undisclosed location. Wow. An evening hike with some of the speakers, and then you're going to have a day on Saturday, October 5th. And I'm not trying to, butter your bun, so to speak, but you're worth the price alone to get in. I would really. I'm if I was going to be around that weekend, I'd come out and check it out. I'm unfortunately I'm not going to be, but I mean, it's not often you get up to Minnesota.
Right. Well, I try to deliver the goods when it comes to speaking presentations and whatever else we're doing at those conferences. So, yeah, this will be a fun one. I've been to Minnesota numerous times on tour with my bands, but
Sure.
I have not done any cryptid events or paranormal events up there, and so it'll be a great one because my good friend Dr. Jeff Meldrum is going to be
Yeah.
there. My brother in cryptids from Texas, Ken Gerhard, Scott Nelson, which I just saw at the Illinois Bigfoot Conference. So it'll be a good event, and it's always fun to just hang out with like-minded people.
And it's I mean, there's so many sightings in Minnesota. There's such a rich community. I can think of a number of groups in the Twin Cities alone that spend their time doing what you're doing and looking for Bigfoot, doing the research, going out in the field and doing it. And Minnesota, I mean, come on, we don't have to big it up too much. Minnesota's a perfect place to take a look. And I long time ago, I spent the day in Reamer for their Bigfoot days, and we did some live broadcasts from there and stuff, and that was a lot of fun. It's a really good community, and you're gonna have a lot of fun. Once again, folks, if on Facebook, look up Minnesota Bigfoot Conference. And if you're more of a website sort of person, go to mnbrt.com. I'm sure the information is there, and that's going to be Friday the 4th through looks like Sunday the 6th. So you definitely want to check it out. Mr. Lyle Blackburn will be there joining everybody. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Now, the reason why, though, one of the reasons we want to have you on tonight is that you got a new book out, Lake Worth Monster, The True Story of the Greer Island Goatman. And, the one thing is that I'm always amazed at is all these different iterations of creatures out there that we're writing about, that we're hearing about, that, I'm for all I know, the Lake Worth Monster is very well known, not to me. So that sort of thing is just like, I love it because there's always something new. Could you give us a little background on this, please?
Right. And I had the forethought to actually have this sitting beside me. So
Now,
this,
Lyle, is that the one that you're supposed to send me and you didn't?
oh, did I send you a PDF? Did I send you a PDF or this? Oh
You
my
sent me
God.
nothing. You sent me, so we're gonna all learn about this book together
We're gonna,
tonight.
oh, I apologize.
No,
Yes,
it's
I
all
am in.
fine. You're
I
fine. I'm
got
giving you.
these on Sunday was when I got my copies,
I'm
but
I love giving people a hard time, so just know that. So,
yeah.
Lyle, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Lake Worth Monster.
But yes, that would have been the book. That was the exact book that you would have received that I received on Sunday. But so yes, essentially this is one. It's this is sort of a hometown thing for me.
Okay.
Because Lake Worth is just a few miles from where I live now, and it's just north of Fort Worth in Texas. And I was born in Fort Worth, and I've lived in Fort Worth, Dallas all my life. Um, this is one that has a lot of notoriety. First off, here regionally, obviously, because when this happened, and this is a case that dates back to the 1960s. It was covered in our Fort Worth Star Telegram newspaper, and back then everybody read the newspaper.
Right.
Um, and since then, it's sort of become something well known through mostly in Bigfoot lore. And some people are aware of it, some people aren't. But essentially, the gist of this is on July 10th, 1969, there were several couples parked out at this area around Lake Worth. And back in 1969, it was like a lover's lane hangout. It was just dirt roads and, the typical thing.
Yep.
Um, it, it wasn't very developed out there, and people would just kind of park, hang out, and party, or, drink and lover's lane things, and even fish. And there was a guy who was down there fishing, and his wife was with him, and it was after dark, and she thought it was kind of spooky, so she stayed up in the car. Well, he's down there fishing, and all of a sudden he hears this scream. He looks up and he sees some kind of a whitish figure which had jumped on the hood of the car and now was making its way to the passenger side where his wife was.
Hmm.
Well, he throws a fishing pole, runs up there, and tussles with this thing for a moment and jumps in the car and drove off. Now, he described it as being upright, covered in hair. The hair was white in color. He thought it had horns. It looked in some ways like a goat, but stood upright on two legs. Well, they drive up to this cafe where they go in and use the phone to call the police, and the police come down, and there's this couple's freaked out. Well, then the other couples that had been out there drove up to the cafe, and now the police had 6 people telling them that they had seen this monster try to attack and pull that woman out of the car. And that, the police were obviously dubious, but they could tell something happened. And ironically, or coincidentally, I guess I should say, they had reports up for a couple of months prior to that of people reporting seeing something weird out there around Lake Worth. So essentially, by the next print run, that was late in the morning. By the next day, it was covered in the Fort Worth Star Telegram, which resulted in all kinds of people being out there the next day and into the next evening, now wanting to see the creature. And that resulted in the people that were there, at least 40 people, witnessing something run up on a ridge and throw a tire and run off, and everybody scattered. And that included some police officers. Well, that got covered in the newspaper on July 11th. So you had these newspaper articles. Now you had the TV stations. So there was a big flap of, I love that when you've got a cryptid case, but it's not just like one guy saw something.
Right.
This is like multiple evenings, 40 people, newspaper coverage. Well, it turned into this big thing that just sort of rolled on with other sightings, all kinds of interesting aspects, and even resulted, there's a couple of photos that were taken. One of these quite famous on the internet. If you look up Lake Worth Monster, you'll see this photo, which was taken later in November. And it's one of the earliest alleged cryptid photos, really, because, I mean, we're talking about 1969.
Sure.
And so over the years, basically, living here, I've gotten leads and gotten to know people that were there and all sorts of manner of things that were involved, and have really gotten some information that's interesting. And so I thought, this would be a great book to write. Lake Worth Library has had me speak on the subject a few times. There's a Lake Worth Monster Bash. So I ended up sort of like, that's the way inspiration rolls. And I'm like, this would be a great book. And it's something that's, though I wasn't, it was a little before my time as far as me getting out there to investigate, unless I was out, getting my parents to drive me there while I was, a little baby. So now I can go back and just really put it together. And so it's a cool book as far as my local lore.
Now, is this the picture here, right here?
That's it. Yep.
Wow. Okay. I was looking it up while you were talking. That's fuzzy, that's for sure. And I mean, don't mean the picture, but it itself.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those, blob squatchy photos where it's like got the typical blurry. But the thing is the guy, the circumstances behind that were later on in November of 1969. This guy, Alan Plaster, was driving down Shoreline Drive at night with 2 other people. And all of a sudden they see something stand up over there and see it in the headlights. Well, he had one of those Polaroid Insta-Snap cameras that spit out the film. Well, this guy had the wherewithal to pick that thing up and somehow get a shot of this before it ran off into the woods. And that's what you got. But I mean, that photo, it's inconclusive, obviously, but with interviews with Alan Plaster that took that, it's either one of two things. That's the subject there is some unknown creature, or it was a hoax. But he was not a hoaxer. It's not a fabricated photo. I mean, it's a legitimate, Polaroid photo that kind of helped. And a woman named Sally Ann Clark wrote a book, a self-published book in 1969. Let me grab that.
Sure.
Which has helped to preserve the case. I mean, this was a self-published thing she did amazingly. I mean, doing interviews and research. And so this helped in a way to preserve the early history of it.
That's, I think what captures my interest of this photo is just the shape of it. Just because it doesn't, I mean, you would think if it's like, I don't know what's around that area, so I don't want to embarrass myself too much, but if it was like a bear or something, it would look like a bear. This doesn't look like anything that I could tangibly say, oh, that's a whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing. I mean, there's no bears down there. And they estimated that the subject was about 7 feet tall based on a tree that was there. Because Alan showed that to Sally Ann Clark, who was down there like every day looking around and researching. And, they knew where it happened and they could see this tree, and they said this thing was huge. And there's, I mean, you might see an occasional bear. There could maybe been a bear, but bears aren't white. So what other upright thing do you have that would fit a white description? So, and also I've talked to, sometimes it's secondhand because this is dating back some years, but I had a woman come up to me when I was speaking out at Lake Worth once and said, this is so interesting, she said, because back in the mid 1950s, my dad came home from hunting one day, just extremely upset. And he said he was hunting and he saw what he described as a huge white ape in the woods. And it scared him to death. And she said, my dad was an outdoorsman. It was not shaken by much. And, he said, I don't know what it was, but this thing was not something I've ever seen. Well, that was, in the 50s.
Yeah.
And, you've got sort of those corroborating things,
It's just so interesting. What I find so interesting about this photo too is like, I know that it's not because you just talked about it. It looks in a way like something shot with night vision, and I know it's not, but I just I find that very interesting. That's all. Yeah.
Yeah. And like I said, if you think about this, I mean, as far as like a alleged cryptid photo or film piece, you got Patterson Gimlin film, 1967, Lake Worth Monster, 1969. This is very, very early stuff.
Yeah, it was.
And like you say, it kind of looks like night vision, almost looks like what we would get today in some ways, or a game camera or something. But this was a dude with a Polaroid. It's amazing.
It is amazing. Lyle, why don't we go ahead and do this? Let's go ahead and take our first break. When we come back, folks, I see some people putting stuff in the comments. We will get to that when we get back. And if you have any questions directly for Lyle, not only just about this book, but anything else, put in the comments. You're listening to GhostBox Radio on AM 950. You got to listen to what that handsome man says in that last commercial. Tickets are limited for the 300 Clifton event that is going to be on September 30th. It's going to be a very, very cool investigation. We're going to be able to do stuff that they don't allow everyone to do. Going into places for investigating different parts of the mansion and different one of the stops on the trolley tour. Folks, if you have an opportunity to do so, go ahead, get these tickets. Go to 300clifton.com and look for GhostBox Radio on the main page. Pick up your tickets. I hope to see you there. We are talking with Lyle Blackburn. We are talking about his most recent book that just came hot off the press, Lake Worth Monster, The True Story of the Greer Island Goatman. And it's available on Amazon. And I do want to ask folks, if you are able, let me ask you, Lyle, is there somewhere special you want people to go? Otherwise, I'd like to send them to my affiliated Amazon link.
Yeah, the Amazon link is good. Yeah.
Okay, because if you go, and I put into the comments, and also go to ghostboxradio.com and find Ghostbox Book Club. We have an affiliated link there. If you get it through our link, it does help Ghostbox Radio, and I wouldn't mind that if you wouldn't mind getting it that way. However you want to do it, though, please support Lyle and his books. They're very good, and I think you're going to like this one a lot. Even though I haven't read it yet, Lyle, but I will one way or another, because there's a really good Kindle price for it too right now, I see. So, it's going to be good. I got a couple comments here that I'd like to read. First, Tracy says that it's actually not a bad picture for 1969. I think it's a great picture, quite frankly.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
And it wasn't until you mentioned the Patterson-Gimlin film in comparison. I think that's one of the things that I was kind of being elusive about, and that you can, well, maybe not, kind of see almost like a muscle structure, because certainly on Patterson-Gimlin, there's like a muscle structure to when she's moving. But I mean, I don't know. I don't find that to be, I think it's just such a fascinating photo.
It looks like, and I believe according to, Alan Plaster, by the time it had stood up, and then by the time he took the picture, it almost looks like you see the shoulder.
Yes.
It started to turn. He got the shot, and I mean, this is a Polaroid of one chance to put that thing in the frame. He did it, and it's almost like its shoulder, and then it ran into the woods. So it was just the perfect timing to get it. So I think what we're seeing is the shoulder and the backside of the head.
Totally. Also, you got a fan in the audience here. Emily says, by the way, I'm a little more than obsessed with Ghoultown, so kind of starstruck. So you got that going for you, Lyle.
All right. Cool. Very cool.
Goes on to says, "Drink with the Living Dead," kind of my theme song. So there you go.
That's our most popular song there. The video, just the video alone, has like 23 million views last time I looked. So
wow.
Somebody's liking it.
Somebody's liking it, and Emily is certainly one of them. Too bad you can't get $1 for every time someone looks at that if you're at 23 million, huh?
I'm telling you, man. Yeah, it's like, someone's getting. I mean, not to say we don't benefit from that, surely, but yeah, Spotify and YouTube and everybody else seems to be taking more of a cut, I'm sure.
It's I mean, anything in any entertainment business is really not no one on a certain level is really making any money off of anything, and it's except for studios and stuff, and it's a shame. It really is. It's very unfair. Let's see here. What else do we have here? Emily also says, I've seen his documentaries, so that's good as well. Now, she had something that I wanted to ask as well, or at least something along these lines. It's interesting, like with you originally talking about with horns and stuff, thus calling it a goat man. Do you think that more than likely there is some sort of people may not be seeing things correctly, and we're all still talking about basically, not when I say the same creature, I don't mean the exact same one, but more of the same line of creatures, but we maybe not see things correctly, so we're adding we're adding things to them, like horns or different things, but we're ultimately maybe looking at pretty much the same thing.
Yeah, well, in this case, the one unique thing about the Lake Worth monster, it almost has two aspects because that first witness um, described it as a goat man, which
Hmm.
is kind of another category of cryptid.
Right.
Well, most of the subsequent witnesses described it more of an ape-like creature, with white hair, but albeit, more of a Bigfoot. And so the first thing is like, which is it? But of course, these sightings are quick, and I mean, the guy who fought with it and said it had horns. I mean, they're not just standing there. They barely posed for the one photo. You don't
Right.
see them very long. This is at night. It's in the woods. There's all sort of factors that could vary into what you describe, um, but it's interesting because really the Lake Worth monster is kind of known as a goat man, but it's something that's sort of beloved by Bigfoot enthusiasts,
Hmm.
and and that's kind of where I get a lot of questions and how the sort of story has built up is through Bigfoot, whereas Goatman itself is sort of a fringe category of cryptid or paranormal, and oftentimes you have goatmen like Maryland Goatman and the Pope Lick monster. These are always associated with bridges and almost more urban legend,
Right.
whereas Lake Worth monster is very much in the cryptid zone, but it does play in with some of that goat man sort of folklore and paranormal. So and I kind of discuss all that in the book because
Hmm.
it kind of lends itself to go on these cool avenues to discuss this. But essentially, the answer is that it could be a combination of unknown creature and people's perception of what they saw at that moment, whether it had horns or no horns or white fur or gray fur or whatever. But essentially, at the end of the day, people saw something they couldn't explain, and that's what we're left with.
Right. How what I mean with the Lake Worth monster, was this one of the earliest uh, creatures to be classified, or roughly classified as Goatman, or had this been around before then?
Um, the Goat Man category of cryptid kind of started around that time in the 60s and early 70s. The Maryland goat man, which is, if you look at cryptid maps or whatever, and there's always the Maryland goat man, that's sort of the king of goat men.
Hmm.
That one really didn't gel until like the early 70s, is sort of, and that one went from people describing it as an ape-like creature,
Hmm.
and almost morphed into this goat man thing. So right in there in the late 60s, early 70s is when all a lot of these goat man things really kind of formed. And it's interesting the parallels between these cases, even though they're in totally different states. So the Lake Worth monster would have definitely been one of the first in terms of cryptid goat men on record.
Do you think that this kind of, lack of a better term, surge, and that people start to talk more about sightings of goat men, does that just happen from when somebody starts in their area talking about, like, Lake Worth, like, this is what we saw, we classify it as goat men, that other people who hear about it, and I'm not sure how they hear about it per se, because this is pre-internet, but they're like, okay, that sounds very much like what we had. We're going to call, like, in Maryland, we're going to call ours a goat man as well. We're going to classify that as goat man.
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly. It's almost like as the as people hear about it or report things, and they say, well, we saw something out there and it was white and it was running on two legs, it was the goat man. So once you've established sort of that persona or category of it, then people, yeah, if they see something, then it just gets thrown into that category. And like I said, the Lake Worth Monster, like they have a Lake Worth Monster Bash every 5 years out at this Fort Worth Nature Center,
Mhm.
right around in the very spot where that happened. And they have a dude dressed up as a goat man. It's kind of a family friendly deal, but
Sure.
they kind of look at it as a goat man. But if you start looking in my book at the majority of the sightings, you're thinking, well, that just seems like a Bigfoot to me. But so yeah, it's hard to say. And ultimately, all of these things are a puzzle because we don't have one here to have on the show.
Right, exactly. Well, maybe
Yeah,
maybe next time I bring you on, we can work a little bit harder on getting one of them on my show with you.
yeah,
If you really
yeah.
want to be on, that sort of thing. But
Bring a goat man with you.
bring a goat man with you, or really impress over in Minnesota, October 4th through 6th by bringing a big man. Really show your pull in this community by bringing a Bigfoot
Right.
out there. Yeah. So with that, what was the main way back in during this period of time, 60s, 70s, that people in other parts of the country are talking about their not only their sightings, but their interest, their almost obsession with Bigfoot, Goatman, whatever else? Because, like I said, obviously it's well before the internet. What was the way that people were communicating with each other?
Most of it was word of mouth. Essentially, that was sort of regionalized, and then eventually, someone would have a sighting that scared them enough to call the police, and usually that ended up in the newspaper. So once
Hmm.
it's in a newspaper, then other people chime in, or they would write the newspaper, or they would call the news, or it would get on the radio and people would call in. And so the news media really was what kind of was the center point and the focus of getting that stuff. And then um, you had guys like John Green, who wrote Sasquatch: The Apes Among Us, like in
Right,
1976,
right.
who had sourced all these articles. I don't know how he did it, and people were sending him stuff, and so then it would become immortalized. And he even wrote about the Lake Worth Monster, and he's from British Columbia. He came down
Hmm.
and interviewed Sally Ann Clark, the woman that wrote the book.
Sure.
And of course, you don't often have a, a book written in 1969 about a case. And this doesn't include all of it because this was written so fast that this was even before the photo. But
Wow. Wow.
um, that helped to preserve that. So you just had all these ways like that were a little more organic than just now with the digital, like immediately just.
Well, and I suppose too, and we've talked about this last time you're on, and obviously talked about with Pamela Pierce, that obviously, whether, the whole film Legend of Boggy Creek, that, I mean, whether or not people have seen it or not, that inspired a lot of people too about, and to actually get to know, are these real? What can we learn about them?
Yeah, I mean, because in a way, Legend of Boggy Creek, which came out in 1972, if you look at that film, it's that docudrama, plays up the scariness. It's the template for every one of these cryptid shows on TV. The
Oh yeah.
reenactment, the interviewing of the witness, it's spooky. I mean, so it was like the early form of people seeing this on the screen going, "Oh my God, somebody saw that." And then you like, my cousin one time saw this, and now creates that conversation, gets that conversation going among people that, you know, kind of would build the story, because now it's not just one person saw it. There's a whole bunch of people that had seen it, but they didn't have any way of knowing until there was the conversation happened.
I look at Legend of Boggy Creek in a sense as the pilot episode to In Search of, because
Mhm. Yeah.
because you just said it exactly. It's the way that In Search of was shot and presented. The only thing really missing from Boggy Creek is Leonard Nimoy, and but it's that kind of that sort
Yeah.
of that storytelling, and that's exactly what makes that film so good. Especially like the beginning when the town folk are talking, and do people really realize that they are actually truly the town folk? then it's them actually chatting back and forth. It's such a great film. If you have not seen this film, you have to go check it out. It's now available in 4K as well. But yeah, it's just so good. It's so good.
Yeah, I do. On that new 4K, I have there's a bonus commentary track where it's me, and you can turn that on, and I'll just tell you all the back stuff behind all those scenes going on. So it adds that extra perspective.
I got to get that. I only have the last one I got was the Blu-ray, so I need to go out and get the 4K and definitely check that out. Why don't we do this? Let's take our next break. We're going to come back. We're going to talk more about the Lake Worth monster. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments for Lyle to answer. We're just having a fun time talking about all these wonderful creatures. You're listening to GhostBox Radio on AM 950. Once again, go and check it out. Go to 300 Clifton and see if you can sign up for our event on September 30th. But also, if you want to see Mr. Lyle Blackburn in person, there is going to be the event, the Minnesota Bigfoot Conference. That is going to be that's the 4th through 6th of October. And you can check out, if you want to just type in Facebook, Minnesota Bigfoot Conference, or if you want to go to mnbrt.com, they're going to have information there as well. We have with us Lyle Blackburn for the final segment here. His newest book, Lake Worth Monster, The True Story of the Greer Island Goatman. We've been talking about the Goatman all hour. Very, very fascinating stuff. I got a couple questions in here. I'm going to go back up a little bit. Emily asked you the question, Lyle, is there, it just moved away from me. Lyle, is there an episode of Monstro Bizarro about the new book?
Yes, actually, the very first episode I did of my Monstro Bizarro podcast, I covered the Lake Worth monster. So yeah, you can get the gist. Interestingly enough, since I did that episode, and I've had my podcast about a year and a half, I've gotten some really good information that kind of pushed me forward to doing the whole book, which was an interview with the son of that original witness, the guy who fought with the Goatman. His mother was the one in the car, which I didn't have at the time when I did the Monstro Bizarro episode. But yeah, my podcast just gives you the gist of that as well.
And Monstro Bizarro, that is available anywhere that you can get podcasts, right?
Yeah, it's on everywhere in the world.
Everywhere in the world, you actually can't miss it. It actually will come after you. That's how it is everywhere. You just do everything, don't you?
I try. Some people don't know I have a podcast because it is sort of. I mean, the way I do mine, it's like it's not an interview based one. I mean, there's a lot of great ones like your own. So I thought I would do something different. So it narrates and talks about these stories and all this, but it's like an audio book meets audio movie, but they take a while to produce. So it's not, so it's infrequent, and I'm writing books and I'm traveling.
Right. So. I've gone down that route early on. Before I did the radio series, I did sort of what I called audio investigations for paranormal, and the same sort of thing. You're taking a lot of pieces, putting together narration and stuff, but it's worth it. It really is worth it. I want to get to some other questions here because folks are very interested in you. Rich says, do you consider the skunk ape as the same species as Bigfoot?
That's a good question, and one that always comes up. Essentially, Bigfoots are described very similarly, but the skunk ape descriptions are often more ape-like. People see them moving on quadrupedally on fours, and they live in a totally different environment compared to, say, Pacific Northwest. So, I mean, you could either have another species, and I almost suggest that the skunk ape is a different species, but also just the habitat and the adaptations to live in a swampy area versus a mountainous area. These things could have changed over time, so that they have these differences, but essentially the same. But it's really hard to say, because you'll find a description from Florida that describes it just like a straight up Bigfoot, and then you'll find one that's more ape-like. So the inconsistencies in descriptions makes it impossible almost to really say definitively if it is another species, but they seem like it.
I've always thought, and I know nothing about anything in this area, I'll be perfectly honest, but I've always thought that was kind of just a regional distinction personally, myself.
And a lot of it is just what you call them. And a lot of these terms originated before Bigfoot was really known in the South,
Sure.
Boggy Creek Monster and Lake Worth Monster and all this. Nowhere in the newspaper articles of Lake Worth did they say it looks like a Bigfoot. Right. Nobody thought about Bigfoot around here at that time, and in Florida as well. So they would call them a skunk ape because that's just what they called them. Whereas maybe now we would look at it and go, it's really a Bigfoot,
Well, and I'm trying to, I don't recall, and I'm pretty sure though that like Boggy Creek, the film never refers to them as Bigfoot or anything like that, right?
There's only one. The locals don't. In the middle of it, where they're at, kind of talking about what it could be. There's the question that says, "Do you think they could be a Sasquatch?" And the guy says, "What is that?" And they say a tribe of very shy people who live in the Pacific Northwest.
Okay,
that's what they answer. So it was very not exactly correct, but that was the only mention of that in that movie. Otherwise, it was just the Fouke monster.
Now we got banter with Richie B. I don't know if you know him. He does a program on Get Haunted as well. I bet you would have a great conversation with him if you were on his program, because he's so into all this. And his question is, in the old reports, 70s, etc., anything in print that you know of talk about, including I'm thinking interdimensional for Bigfoot related to orbs, such as, is such a hot topic these days. Curious if you come across anything like that. I'm not big on it, but I'm curious. I'm kind of reading that cold, so I'm going to try to translate that again. Basically, there's a lot of talk about these that Bigfoot being interdimensional, which is actually something that I lean towards myself, but that feels like that's something more new. Does that go back a certain period of time of anybody who thinks that, I should say?
The majority, I think, by and large, this talk of Bigfoot being interdimensional is mostly a modern thing. Back in the 70s, if you read John Green's books, at least, or you look at old newspaper reports, it's very much just an animal or a monster in the woods. Usually they describe it as a monster.
Right.
But, that being said, in the 70s golden era of paranormal, you would have parallels between some of these odd things, like in the case of Momo the Missouri Monster, which I wrote a book about.
Yes, you did.
There is sightings of a creature. There's sightings of orbs and UFOs. And a lot of people thought more in terms of these creatures were extraterrestrial, not interdimensional, extraterrestrial.
Yep.
So you would see that in the 70s reports sometimes with the UFOs and the Bigfoots. But mostly back then it was just creature in the woods. And then nowadays it just seems like everything is just, people will tell me that they're paranormal, and I can't say they're not. I mean, we don't know.
Absolutely. And I like that answer because I also feel like, because like I said, I lean towards interdimensional, and I have my reasons for doing so, but I also wonder, is it possible that we can be talking about two forms here, one that is interdimensional and one that is animal-based, because of how we hear and what we see about reports of how they act and how they interact. because I've seen like two ways. Like I've experienced firsthand of something that feels more like a like an entity opposed to an animal, but you see reports of them acting like animals. So I find that to be like I could see it almost being there's maybe two different things happening at once here. And like you said, I don't know. I mean, until we have the opportunity to interview one, we're not really going to know for sure, are we?
Right. I mean, it's all speculation. So, I mean, nobody's right or wrong. And you're right. It depends on the person. And that's a good point. It could very well be two totally different things. It's like the goat man becomes Bigfoot. It's like,
Yeah.
well, it's this thing that looks Bigfoot like, but is this a flesh and blood, or is that interdimensional? Maybe it's two different things that we're putting together in one, because we have built that cultural persona of a Bigfoot. We see something tall and dark. It's pretty much a Bigfoot. So, it's just, we're just always talking and discussing and trying to find those answers that are still hard to come by.
Very hard to come by. Richie B also asked regarding skunk apes. Do you think they smell like a skunk? Do you think I can learn to read? Okay. Do you think they smell a skunk because they have big skunk cabbage diet in the swamps? Because it comes down to, they're called that basically because of their smell, right? I mean, originally.
Right. That's where the name came from, which was attributed to what's the smelliest animal people think of? The skunk.
Absolutely.
I think that could be, if you're covered in hair and living in a swamp, you're going to smell horrible, period. I mean, animals have an animal smell, or it could be a defense mechanism, or pheromones, any number of things. I don't really think it's the diet, because oftentimes you'll get reports from Arkansas or something where people said it had a horrible odor. Well, they're not necessarily in a swamp, and they're not eating the same diet. So I think this would be more of something coming from their pheromones or whatever,
I mean, I don't know if I can't remember if you and I talked about this before. I had seen and actually had one touch me in Indiana and West Point last year. We smelled one in West Point, Kentucky, and the odor to us was one of something that didn't take care of itself, if you know what I mean. Like it didn't clean itself after going to the bathroom. It just it just was very, very specific. So it was grand. It was on a big scale, so it's not like, not like a rabbit that didn't take care of itself. It was really pretty bad here. Let's see here. Emily is saying this is a great episode. I didn't even realize Lyle was on when I tuned in. Made my day. I'm such a big fan of all he does. Definitely needed this today. Thank you, Greg. Greg never disappoints. Well, that's why I had to put that up there. One last question, because we really don't have any time whatsoever. Tracy just asked, do you do all crypto stuff? I'm curious on Phoenix Thunderbird. All I can really get you is a yes or no from this, because we got to wrap up here.
I'm not an expert on Thunderbirds, but I've interviewed some people that have had sightings of those. So yeah, and I'm interested in all cryptids.
Yeah, it is. And also I would recommend checking out Robert Robinson, who has done a couple books based on all sorts of like categorizing and cataloging cryptids. So, and I can get you that information as well. Once again, the book is called Lake Worth Monster, The True Story of the Greer Island Goatman, written by Lyle Blackburn. Lyle, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you had a good time tonight. I certainly did.
Absolutely. Enjoyed it, as always.
Absolutely. Don't forget to go see him in Minnesota, October 4th through 6th at the Minnesota Bigfoot Conference. We'll see you all tomorrow. Have a good night.